Hello, everyone. Thank you all the viewers to be here with us today. It's a very special time that we're going to spend with Dr. Carolina Comandulli, who is very, not only a good friend of mine, but her knowledge of indigenous people in the Amazon is very special and very unique. Her whole life, I feel, is very special and unique. And she's going to share with us this knowledge she has, a special knowledge that I feel is going to help a lot of us to understand more, not only about indigenous people, but about nature, because we often forget that we are nature ourselves, and we don't really know how to interact with nature. Sometimes we are afraid. But Carolina, the talking stick is yours. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Paula, for this invitation, and thank you everyone who is watching this presentation, especially the young people attending this event, this very special event that is not just about talk, but is also about action as well. And today I'm going to present a case which is about thoughts, feelings, and actions as well. Sharing a case from the Brazilian Amazon of an indigenous population with which I lived together for 2.5 years. And thanks, Paula, for the introduction. I think I will start sharing my screen, and I hope you can see it. Is it working? Can you see it and hear me well?
Yes, thank you, Carolina.
Okay, thank you. So I call the presentation Forest People's Power, the Ashaninka people from a Pilcha village. Yeah, just complementing a little bit my introduction, I'm an anthropologist from University College London, but I'm Brazilian. And I'm also connected to the Center for the Anthropology of Sustainability and Extreme Citizen Science Research group. So my presentation results from my PhD research, which was about a contemporary case of indigenous world making in the Amazon. And such case is not based on the classic development paradigm of progress and growth, but their world making is focused on the continuity of life of human and other than human beings. So instead of a paradigm which is just focused on economic growth, this indigenous development model wishes to take into account, especially life in general, not just human life, but the life of all beings that dwell with us in this planet. So because I'm talking from a very specific place, and I know this event is international, so I think it's fair to give a little bit of context of the situation of indigenous peoples and the state, and the Brazilian state, a bit of the history. So basically, there has been a big change in the relationship between the Brazilian state and indigenous peoples, especially after 1988. So it's a very recent story. Before 1988, the state had a very hostile relations with indigenous peoples. And the indigenous peoples in Brazil, they were under a system of tutelage. And tutelage means that the state didn't recognize the self-determination, the decisions made by indigenous peoples. So they were not allowed to have voice and make decisions by themselves. The state was the responsible for speaking and deciding on behalf of indigenous peoples. And at the same time, the Brazilian state had pursued a model of integration of indigenous peoples because the idea was that our society was much more advanced. You know, the Western society or the non-Indigenous society was much more advanced than the Indigenous cultures, and that they would inevitably disappear, their cultures would disappear. So the state had a series of policies of integrating Indigenous peoples into the national society by training them to work on determined tasks, or by putting them into reserves, Indigenous reserve, lived in like, and sedentarizing these populations that often had a much more mobile lifestyle. And then after 1988, after much struggle from social movements and partners, basically this constitution that is on the image here was approved, which is Brazilian Democratic Constitution. And this constitution recognized the self-determination of the Indigenous peoples in Brazil, recognizing that they could decide and think by themselves, and recognizing the cultural diversity. So instead of integration, the concept was, well, we can live with the diversity of different cultures in this country. So this is conceptually what the Constitution says. Well, and I put now, because now we are living in a very complex situation here in Brazil. Some of you might be following, but of course there is some rollbacks in terms of rights, but the Constitution is still there. So at that time, the environment, in relation to the environmental agenda and forest peoples, we can say that before 1980s, there was the drive of the Brazilian state was to exploit indigenous territories. So it was basically taking out indigenous peoples from their lands and using those spaces for development, bringing roads, bringing extractive industries, and causing a lot of deforestation and degradation, basically. So it was a type of what we call brown development. And after the 1980s, also with this constitution and the struggles that came before, there was the creation of, well, environmental rights increased, and there was the creation of a lot of protected areas in the country, and the paradigm of sustainable development also became something that guided a lot of policy making in the country. And there was the recognition of a lot of indigenous lands as well after the 1980s. So there was a change there, but now again we are living a bit of a weird time. So this is the current, well, an approximate image of indigenous lands in Brazil. If you can look at the map, you will see in green where titled indigenous lands are, because there is a lot of indigenous lands that are still waiting titling. So these are the ones that are titled, and well, we have an outdated figure of the Brazilian population of indigenous peoples, but roughly 900,000 people, but it's from 2010 census. So it's certainly over 1 million people in Brazil. And we have more than 305 ethnic groups and more than 274 languages that are still spoken. So this is a really huge diversity, not just cultural, but linguistic diversity as well, that is still alive in this country. And we have nearly 600 indigenous lands titled, which account for approximately 13% of Brazil's territory. And indigenous lands have been a real barrier to deforestation, to the destruction of the forest and of this diversity that there is. So this image is not the best image, but the part that you can see in green in the middle is called the Xingu Park, the Xingu indigenous land, and the Kayapó lands. And around it, the red bits are deforestation. So we can, you know, and this is just one image. I mean, we could show the image of many indigenous lands in Brazil and see how effective they are in preventing deforestation and degradation because of the way they live with the environment. So let's go to Acre State in the Amazon, in the border with Peru. This is where the Ashaninka people from Apilcha live, in a border region, because actually most of the Ashaninka people, they are in Peru, but there is a small part of their population that is in Brazil, and this is where I spent 2.5 years. So yeah, this is a map of the Ashaninka territory in dark red. You can see Brazil and Peru, and all the bits in dark red is where Ashaninka people are. So the Ashaninka people are probably the biggest indigenous population of the lowland Amazonia. They are about 100,000 as a population. But of course, I lived in a village, so it's much less people there. And the village where I live is circled in red, and I can show you another image. Now it's putting Brazil into perspective, and you can see a small red circle over there in the border with Peru. This is where I stayed. And this is a beautiful image by a shaman from the village called Moises. And he did this painting. He's a great painter. And he did this painting representing his view on how is their land on the left-hand side and what happens outside their land on the right-hand side. So it's quite easy to read. On the left-hand side, you can still see forest standing, the beautiful villages, the big trees, the animals. And on the right-hand side is basically some sort of cattle pasture and the destruction of the forest. Well, this group, the Ashaninka from Apilcha, which is the name of the village and the name of the association as well, they are in Acre State. The population of this indigenous land is about 1,000 people, and they got their land title in 1992. And their land covers, their land, their title land is about 87,000 hectares in the Amazon. And since the land titling, the Ashaninka from Apilcha, they have been designing solutions to be as autonomous as possible from external systems that used to oppress them, such as religious systems, market-related systems, political systems, or debt peonage systems. I mean, systems of a type of slavery, let's say. Because before the lands were titled, it was more difficult to secure, to protect themselves from these external threats. But once they recognized and they had their land titled, these 87,000 hectares titled, they began really, you know, taking a fresh look into the future and designed a series of ways of not being dependent or trapped into these external systems that were, you know, badly influencing their lives. And one of the key things in this is the role of shamanic visioning. So the Ashaninka from Apilcha, they have a very strong spiritual tradition, as many indigenous peoples have. And then you have the shamans, what we translate as shamans, but they are the spiritual leaders. And the spiritual leaders have a very important role in indigenous societies. So basically, they have a very important role in also guiding the community into their world-making process, into how they turn, where they turn to into their decision-making process. So what I call shamanic visioning is a form of communication that they developed with other than human beings. And this shamanic visioning is key in the design process of their world making. And this type of visioning precedes thought and action. So in that sense, what I mean by that, if we think about, most of the nation states, and their governments, the decisions are usually made based on like a materialization or rationalization. Many nations is based like on statistics, on, scientific studies, that kind of data that we gather and, make decisions upon them. But in this Ashaninka community, a lot of the decision making is born out of the shamanic vision. And the shamanic vision is not a vision by the shaman as an individual, as a closed individual, but is a vision that comes out of a dialogue, of a communication that shamans have with other than human beings, with other beings that are present in the forest space. So they have ways, they have developed practices that entail communication beyond humans. And that's very unique. And it's common also in other indigenous cultures. So the visioning or dreaming has a lot of power into the shaping of their designs and of their society. So Moises, this shaman, he says, our life is a dream. The dream is a continuity of our life. We also dream awake with the continuity of our life. What's happening here is the continuation of our grandfather's dream. Here we are, his grandchildren, accomplishing what he thought, guaranteeing the continuity of our people and constructing the best path to all of us. So these dreams and these powerful visions are really guidance for their the world-making process. So the grandfather is the elder here at this picture. He is called Samuel Pianco, and he already passed away, but he is the grandfather that Moises is referring to. And beside him, the gentleman beside him is the current chief of the village, who is called Antonio. And Antonio Pianco married Pichi, who is the lady at the back of the shaman. And Pichi was a non-indigenous woman, and she was part of a dream, actually. So Samuel had a vision that his son would marry a non-indigenous woman, and this marriage would help them deal with the invasions and with the threats to their culture coming from the non-indigenous culture. And so it happened, because this marriage, out of this marriage, they had 7 children, which are all leaders today. One of them is Moises. They are all very strong leaders acting into the bridging these two worlds, the indigenous and non-indigenous, and helping in this whole design process of like how to protect their culture in face of so many threats. So I will now go more concrete to show a few of their designs, contemporary designs for autonomy. And a lot of them are connected to the visions. So if you look at the top where the buildings are, this is a cultural center that the Ashaninka built outside their village, close to the town, close to the urban area of the town that is close to their village. And the design of this center that is really beautiful, and as you can see, came from a vision of another shaman called Benki. And he imagined how they could, as Ashaninka people, connect to the world. So the Ashaninka people represent the star at the center, and the circle around it is the world. And every extremity of this star is reaching all parts of the world. And there is a lot more philosophy behind, or well, actually a lot more dreaming behind these buildings. But this is a place where they do exchange with indigenous and non-indigenous peoples. And So this place has been a very important place to show their culture and their example to the world so far. So in terms of their designs, they decided to create one single village when the land was titled. And this village is called a Pilcha because before the Ashaninka used to live more scattered in the forest, and with the titling they decided to move to this single village to protect the entry of the territory, to strengthen their community organization, and also to better manage the flora and the fauna in their territory so that is not depleted. And so they call the village Apilcha, and Apilcha means union in their language. So they are driven by the idea of collaboration, of getting together, of uniting for a bigger goal, you know. So this is what drives the community, what drives the association. And actually, on the right-hand side, there is this drawing of also done by a shaman, by Moisés in this case. He drew the symbol of the association, which is the shape of their indigenous land, and then the Ashaninka person in the middle. And then beside the Ashaninka person, there are two like small trees, but this is actually the ayahuasca vine. And the birds that they call the Japó birds is a specific species of bird that helps them to communicate with these other than human beings. And then the stars, because they seek for this advice for shamanic visioning from the beings that are up in the sky. So this is the and then you see blue is the river and green is the forest. So the Ashaninka is at the center there, enlightened by this relationship with the plants and the birds and looking after its territory. So it's very profound. Every word and every concept and every drawing that they have reveals that aspect of a community of beings, which is not just like being human, but being together with nature. And of course, they created a Pilcha association to defend their interests in the outside world. And some other very interesting designs. One of them was the design of the cooperative. They didn't, before they worked for patrons, they worked for even for loggers, and they were forever indebted. So they created a cooperative and began producing, sustainably producing their crafts for sale, which are most amazing, their crafts. And then they break up with the economic dependence on the patrons. And the cooperative used the traditional Ashaninka exchange system, economic system, where the families deliver the crafts and have access to goods. They don't even need to use money because they continue using a system of exchange, and it has been very successful. And they also have an emphasis on self-sustenance, keeping agrobiodiversity, setting up agroforestry systems, restoring the fauna, the flora, and promoting collective agreements for the territory. I know my time is a bit short, so I think I will try and jump, Paula, to the last slide, which gives us some, yeah, you can have a look at the images here, the whole agroforestry, agrobiodiversity, the leadership system that looks in, is a very complex and sophisticated leadership system that I could talk a lot, but they try to combine, non-indigenous systems with the indigenous system in a very successful way. You can see the hierarchical is the non-indigenous and the circles is the indigenous system. And they have been exchanging with other indigenous communities and non-indigenous as well to support them beyond their territory, and even engaging, with technology and other resources from the non-indigenous world, which are useful to them. So to conclude, some principles which are very important in their work are union. So they put the collective above the individual interests. Collaboration over competition. So in these collaborative efforts, they focus a lot of like sharing knowledge, sharing experiences with others. non-subjugation to external systems of domination, as I expressed before, and valuing life, human and not other than human life, above political, economic, or individual interests. So this is it. Sorry if I use longer than I should, but I hope that was clear to everyone. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Pasonki.
Thank you, Carolina. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful presentation. I love the drawing and it's a beautiful story. And I still remember when almost 2 years ago, the Asheninka were in London, in the city, in the inner city, in this big law firm. And while they were speaking, there were these big top lawyers with tears in their eyes. They were so moved by the Asheninka words and wisdom. So thank you for sharing with us all of this today. A question would be, what is the biggest learning you had in the time you spent with them? What sort of wisdom or special message you would like to share with our participants, especially the youth one? Thank you.
There were so many learnings. It has been really like a life-changing experience, and there has been a lot to learn with them. But let me think about one thing. I think one thing that is, that was very powerful to me was about silence. So they taught me about silence, how important silence is in communication, and how important silence is to get to know oneself and to tune into the rest of life that exists around us. Because, we in the West, like generalizing, of course, but we became so rational, like everything we inquire, like our scientific method is about building theories until someone else comes and falsifies our theories, So it's about any statement, you have all the time to ask why and if and what and who, and and this is an obsession that tires our brain, our soul, and also narrows our perception of the world. So the Ashaninka people, they don't ask much. They don't tell people what they should do. And they communicate very little. They are very silent people. They communicate little in the sense that we communicate, we talk too much, in a way like, so I learned how powerful silence is and how revealing silence can be. And if it's practiced at a collective level, even more. And I think that really clashed, with, well, that really brought me answers sometimes with, my tiredness with the rationalization, because reason does bring all the answers,
Thank you so much, Carolina. I love the science, especially in
the silence or the science?
The silence. Another elder, Indigenous elder, talk about silence, being nature in silence, to listen to nature. So thank you very much for your shine today. And thank you very much for all the participants of Earth Action Hub that have been watching this incredible talk today. And we invite you to explore Earth Action Hub and more talks, more conversation, the workshop, that networking, the forum. There is a lot of explore. It's like a whole new planet on Earth Action Hub. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you super soon. Thank you
so much,
Caroline.